Okay, so let's talk about Isekai. Now, that word Isekai, unless you actually watch anime, you would have no idea what that word means at all. Actually, you can't just be an average anime watcher. Because even if you've seen like the more popular stuff, like let's say Jujutsu Kaisen or like Solo Leveling or something like that, but you don't really go deep into the other things, then you would really have no idea what Isekai is. As a matter of fact, it's hard to say it's even a genre. I would say it's more like a subgenre within anime itself. More specifically, a subgenre of probably like fantasy. Because fantasy, you can say, is a genre. Even in regular TV, like I can't really say that fantasy itself is a popular genre. I say sci-fi is science fiction, definitely. There's movies, there's TV that have, more science fiction stuff, but I can't necessarily say fantasy. But in anime, there's definitely stuff that goes along the realms of fantasy. Most recently, I can think of Frieren, which is very popular. You should check it out. I actually personally could not get into Frieren, but I've heard a lot of good things about it and people really like it. But personally, it was just not for me. It was just too slow. The pacing is way too slow. But I can see how people like it because it just has such an interesting story. But speaking of Frieren, I think I did see something where someone asked if Frieren is an isekai, and it's just not. It's a regular fantasy. So now that I've said that, we have to get into what is an isekai. What is an isekai anime, to be more specific? And it's pretty straightforward. It's basically just means traveling into another world. Most isekai plots go something like this. You have the guy living a normal life, or maybe he doesn't like his life. He doesn't enjoy maybe his job or his school or whatever, but he basically just lives in normal Japan. And one day something happens, he dies. That's usually what happens. There seems to be this trope in Isekai specifically where they get hit by trucks. Like they're crossing the road or something and then they just get hit by a truck. It's so common. And you'll see it just repeated over and over again. But something happens, or maybe there's like some sort of portal that opens and they just get transported into another world. And then that world, they basically, well, it's not just transported. Sometimes they get reincarnated. So that's the two things. So if they die, like I mentioned earlier, like they get hit by a truck, they would get reincarnated. Or if there's a portal, they're gonna get transported into that world. And once they get transported into that world, they're basically living a whole nother life. And some isekai, the guy will be like 30, 40 years old or something. And then some of them, they'll be reborn as maybe like a baby or something. And then they grow into the main character that is present day in that anime. Or they'll just kind of like just become a part of that world already grown. So as you can already see, there's different variants of isekai, but they all have that main focus, that main theme of they were in this world before and something happened and now they're in this other world. And the last, once they get transported, the last common theme that I'll see is that sometimes it'll be they'll get summoned. So they'll get summoned as these heroes that have to save this world. A good example, I would say, is Shield Hero. A lot of anime have that same plot as Shield Hero, where they get summoned and then they have to save that world. And those are basically the main elements of isekai. You're in this world, usually just like modern day Japan or modern day Earth or whatever, and they get transported into a fantasy world. And then from that world, it's a regular fantasy world for the most part. It really just depends on the story itself, because there's a wide range of isekai from really, really good to really, really bad. And trust me, I've seen a lot of them. So it really just depends on the story from then on and how it's written, how the source material is, to determining how good it actually is. So where did Isekai actually come from? Because if you've been watching anime for a while, you probably did not hear that word Isekai in the earlier days, I would say like 2010 to maybe like 2016. That's probably when that word Isekai really started to come together, to originate, and you just hear it more often. I would say, if I had to guess, I'm not completely certain on it, but I would say maybe around like 2016, 2017, something like that. I would say around that time. And then from that on, you just basically see Isekai. And here's my theory, right? I just think that it started with a few anime. More specifically, from what I remember, it started with Sword Art Online. And if you guys don't know what Sword Art Online is, it's basically this anime where they go inside of a game. So they basically put on a headgear. The game is called an MMORPG. And then they're now inside of that game as if it was real life. So it's just really, really advanced. And then one day they get stuck in the game. So they can't ever leave that game. And that's basically the main plot of Sword Art Online. At least the first season anyway. But the other seasons do kind of derive from that same theme basically. But that's where I think most of it started. That whole transported to another world. Obviously, there were other animes that have transported to other worlds before. One I can think of is Inuyasha. That is like really the OG of being transported to another world of animes. But the wave of Isekai, aka transported to another world animes being made, mainly comes from Sword Art Online. It definitely started from Sword Art Online because ever since that anime came out, it was just Isekai after Isekai after Isekai after Isekai. And it's not just that, the titles will be so long too. And they just kept on going. And then that's where I feel like the word just kind of just became what it was. Because all of these animes with the same plot, with being transported to another world, just kept on coming out. At some point, it just created its own genre, and that's what it is. Some of my favorite Isekai, I'm definitely a huge fan of Overlord. I always recommend Overlord, but it is a very specific anime. You're either gonna be really into it or really not into it. If I had to recommend another Isekai that I would say most people would probably be into, try the first season of ReZero. ReZero is so good, so good. But besides that, there's a bunch, and I mean a bunch of other Isekais, ranging from good to bad. Like I said, you just have to be good at finding the right one. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think I've explained Isekai pretty well, pretty detailed. But yeah, if you were curious or now you just know information maybe you didn't really care about, but that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching.